Hey guys, I wanted to just go through a quick run over of all the changes I made on the coolant system. The original car kind of came with the Civic expansion tank that it just sat up here. It was kind of a pain in the butt because you couldn't take off the covers without trying to fiddle with that and either trying to force it down through the fiberglass or pull the hose off. And I didn't want to deal with that anymore. I made a lot of changes so I can get all the fiberglass off quickly, like cutting it in half, making a flange. It has 2 Zeus fasteners on it here, and there won't be anything up in the fiberglass anymore other than the intake. This was just temporary for the first startup yesterday. That'll be changing. I ended up going with this Radium tank, and it's a little overbuilt. It's billet. It's kind of heavy, especially compared to the thin fabricated aluminum tanks. But the things I liked about it, I like the sight glass. I liked how it had this kind of like built-in swirl feature up here in the top. And I also like how on the bottom it had both specifically, this is supposed to meant for a return. So you route this back to the to a location that's right before the pump, the water pump intake. And then this one is, so that's meant to go out. So it comes in here, swirls, goes down there. And then also you have this one, which is meant to bleed in like steam vents. So this could be like from the top of the head. I ended up running lines from the top of the radiators to this little -4 lines going to a Y that comes into here. This one here for the swirl tank, I'm using the stock block here. This goes into that. On the 3S, this same block is also used for turbo feed right here. And then the turbo return is welded into this pipe here. Talking about the steam vents, someone on the Facebook group turned me on these really awesome Moroso bleeds. So the idea is it's a spring-loaded little like needle valve or something, and you press it down, and if there's any air in the top of the tank, it's supposed to shoot out. So this is one of the 2-4 lines I have that goes back up to that header tank to kind of help try and get any air out of here. And then they have the same exact setup on the front radiator here. So again, here's a -4 line, and it goes all the way back, goes into a Y, goes into that right side of the radium tank in the back. And this one works wonderfully. Whenever I press this, like this always lets air out. This one works really great. I thought this one might be a waste of time because it has to go so far, and it also has to go down before it can go up. Whereas this one in the back, it's kind of the exact opposite. Back here, this never lets air out. I think because it's too low, you know, like the air's going to be trapped, you know, way up here, and this isn't the high spot. You know, on the front radiator, this is the high spot. So if I had to do it over again, I think I'd run the -4 line only in the back, and I wouldn't run the bleed. And in the front, I'd do the opposite. In the front, I'd keep the bleed, but I wouldn't run the line. I might notice a little different if you have a 3S. I switched this over to, I welded on a -20 fitting here. And I was looking at the car when I had the engine out, and I just didn't like how the intercooler tank, which is kind of a heavy part when it's full of water, was back on the heaviest corner of the car. So I wanted to move it over to the right, but of course then I was having clearance issues with the alternator. And I was planning on installing a electric water pump, like you see down here. And so I thought that would, you know, fix all my clearance issues. It didn't. I'll get back to that in a minute. So this is a Pierburg CWA400. Techomotive sells a controller you can use for this. I'm just using the Infinity EMS by AEM to control it. This pump is a beast. It only weighs 8 pounds. It can draw up to 36 amps. And I saw a flow chart once for an LS1, and with the mechanical fuel pump, you know, right before cavitation at 7,000 RPM, it was flowing something like 55 gallons per minute. This pump actually flows 58 gallons per minute, and that's against a relatively high head pressure, 8 psi. The biggest Messier electric water pumps, I believe they're brushed, but they flow 55 gallons per minute, and that's at a head pressure of 0 psi. So these things really do flow. And if you think like, oh, maybe that can't cool my turbo motor, this is actually the pump that's OEM on the twin turbo V8 BMWs these days. So this thing's pretty badass. It was a bit of work. I welded in this little bracket down here, kind of acts as a gusset here in the corner, and I 3D printed these little brackets to fit the weird location of the mounting tabs on both sides. Come around the other side, it's a little easier to see. That AN line kind of going into that aluminum fitting there, that's what sucks out of the bottom of the radium tank. So that's the suction portion of the radium tank. One of the other things on the SRA that I thought was kind of strange was I had this like slipped off a jack. I had a jack here once and it slipped off and it caught that pipe and it put a dent in that pipe. And so I went to go replace it, and when I pulled the pipe out, I don't think this is true on all Atoms, but on my SRA that pipe was steel and it was surprisingly heavy. So I've replaced that with aluminum on this one here. So now that I have the intercooler tank over here on the right, you can see how tight it is there to the alternator, and that is actually an S2000 alternator. It just hit with the stock alternator. Like, you cannot fit a stock Civic or ILX alternator in here. The S2000 one's a little bit smaller. And originally, our blocks here, it seems like almost everything that's made for the Honda K series these days is really made for the K20A2 or the original K24A, and these of course are K24Z7s, and they're almost identical. The motors are almost identical in a million and one ways. However, one of the ways they're not identical is in the location of this stud. If you look here, the stud is it's just a little higher. On the K24As, this stud's right here. It's like square with this one. And I'd reached out to Rob at TracTuff and asked him if he'd make a water pump delete with that one bolt relocated so it fit the K24Zs. And originally he told me sure if I wanted to buy 40 of them or more. And of course I didn't want to do that, so I just kept bugging him for a year. And eventually he put out on Facebook that if someone would send him the dimensions, that he'd make a K24C water block. So I pulled off. This on the stock motor has a giant aluminum casting. The casting itself, the aluminum casting, weighs 8 pounds. And it doubles as an alternator bracket, a tensioner bracket, a place for the thermostat to mount. I mean, it's a huge casting. And so I pulled mine off, and it has like something comes off the side here, kind of down low, I think maybe. And I had to mill that off, and then I was able to throw that stock casting on my 2D scanner, scanned it, turned it into a CAD file, sent it to Rob, and he now sells them. You can now buy a K24Z water block off plate, and there's one of the first ones. So it has a dash 20 there that is connected to this. And then you can also see that blue fitting down in there. That actually goes to the crankcase. So I already have this little breather, which I'd like to run to a proper catch can. But I'll also eventually I just have it capped for now, but I'll also eventually be running that to a catch can just to help vent the crankcase a little better. So that thing's slick. It weighs almost nothing, and it also allows you to ditch the tensioner. And I didn't realize what a pain in the butt the tensioner would be, because if you look on the stock intake manifold for the K24Z7, it really curves out, and it curves, I believe it curves away. And here on the Skunk 2 manifold, it's perfectly straight. It doesn't curve away. So you end up having all this here in the way of where the tensioner normally mounts. And so I love how now I just have this little tiny turnbuckle for tensioning the belt here. You don't have to actually run a separate tensioner. So you're saving weight by ditching that giant casting. You're saving weight ditching a tensioner. I think it's pretty darn slick. One little hiccup though is you need a really short belt, right? If you're not running the tensioner anymore, you're not running power steering, AC, nothing. I mean, all that's on here now is, you know, just the alternator, just that one belt. That's a really short belt. And one of the strange things is that this motor comes with a 7-rib belt, which is just a bastard. Like, everything's either 6 or 8. And so in this weird little small size I needed, I was only able to find a 6-rib. So you'll see there's one rib just not populated there. And it should be fine. You shouldn't have any trouble turning the alternator with that. Let's see, anything else? Maybe I'll make another video later about the oil system when I swapped to the Type S oil. That was the Type S oil pump, and I ditched the counterbalance shafts in this thing. That created a whole another new set of headaches. But I'll touch on that in another video maybe later. So if I had to do this all over again, I had to get pretty creative figuring out where the heck I was going to mount this thing. I ended up making this bracket that attaches to the head, and then it's separated by some phenolic spacers. So, you know, if this tank gets hot, it's not, you know, preheating my intake here. But I think if I had to do it all over again, just a few months ago, again, Rob at TracTuff, he came up with a new billet solution for this block that comes off the head. And he also does a lot of custom stuff. And one of the other things, like even now that I have this done, to run on the track, I really should have this go to a tank. Right now, I just have it down there in a mess of hoses, just kind of poking out the bottom, so it doesn't spray hot coolant on my head. But I think if I had to do this all over again, I don't think I'd use this radium tank again. Like I said, it's a little bit heavy. I think what I would do is I would ask Rob at TracTuff to custom fabricate me one of his new water blocks here, and have him incorporate both a swirl tank and a recovery tank, and it'd be all in one. Just one little thing would bolt on, and you'd have both tanks here, you'd have this, you'd have the water let outs, and have everything come back to that. I think that would be a much better solution, a lot cleaner, a lot more simple, and lighter as well. You probably save money by not having to run as many hoses, etc. The last little thing I had to do here was when you're switching from a stock intake manifold to an aftermarket one, is a lot of them there's a hole here for the coolant to come out, and you have to block that off. So I believe K-Tuned invented these. I believe the original ones are from K-Tune. And so that you have to put that on there as well. And I used a little RTV or Honda Bond there to make sure that thing didn't leak. And so far it's working great. So those are my thoughts on improving Ariel Atom coolant, and hope everyone's having a good one. Bye.